You're listening to the Mind Flipping Podcast, where you'll find tools and tips to help you renovate and update your mind and life.
Samantha, thank you so much for being on the Mind Flipping Podcast.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, Rick. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you for reaching out. You reached out with, I guess you had heard Maggie's, actually, prior to clicking recording, you were searching Maggie Minsk,
right?
A previous guest on the Mind Flipping Podcast. Now, how did you hear about her?
So last year I found this organization in the UK called the Human Givens, and I started taking some online classes and really appreciated their down-to-earth modality and it's a lot based in research science, and it just made sense to me. And I started using a lot of the tools in my sessions with clients right away. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And so I got excited about them, and I started taking, I signed up to do their courses here. It was going to be in North Carolina, and those were canceled because they couldn't get enough people together. So then I ended up going to the UK. And I went all the way through to their part 2, just finished part 2 a few months ago, and am so impressed with the model that I wanted to bring them here. So I live in Los Angeles, and I invited them to come here and do the training this summer.
Fantastic.
So I was looking for other people who might have heard of it, and I knew Maggie had set up the training in North Carolina that took place a few years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
So I listened to that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And she just touches on human givens, right, in that episode?
Yeah, it's brief because
Yeah.
I believe she's a hypnotist, and she was really talking about her work. And then she talked about the Human Givens model and how she uses it, because it really gives a kind of a broad overview of really working with people. And it's all based on the basic human needs. So they've come up with 10 human needs. And as a therapist, it really helps because you're looking at the needs as what's going on in the life, in somebody's life that might point to something that's out of balance.
Sure. So as a psychotherapist, a social worker, hypnotherapist, people come to us with a problem, and looking at the that these problems may be a result of human needs not being met. Is that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So basically what they're saying is if all our human needs are in balance, we're going to be in balance, meaning we're not going to be depressed or anxious or have an eating disorder or substance abuse. And so that really helps in the session, because a lot of times with talk therapy, it takes a while to get to the problem, to the root of it, where this, I really think, goes to the heart of it. And they've also done a lot of research that shows, that our emotions are there to indicate that something's wrong, or that we need something, whether it's food or sex or whatever. It's like they're there for a reason. And so instead of going to the thoughts and trying to why are you thinking this way? We go a step back to the emotions and what are those trying to tell us? And then we even go a step further. So that with the step back from the emotions was there a traumatic event? Was there something that, created this sense of disease? So it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. So 3 things came up that I want to come back to. You said you have this thought. All right, what's the emotion that brought up this thought? And then what's before that? So kind of what you're saying is whether it was trauma.
Right. Which they call, Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. Like kind of where did this emotion start?
Right.
And often in the work that I do with clients, I'll bring up the fact that, emotions are a good thing. They're
right.
I liken them to, and I've heard this through some of my training, to the gauges and lights on the dashboard of a car. It's just an indicator that something in our life needs attention.
Beautiful. Yeah. That's a great analogy. I like that. I'll use that.
Yeah. And it's a way, just like when your oil light comes on or that windshield washer light comes on, that needs attention. We want to take care of that to get longer, reliable life out of our vehicle. Same with our body.
Exactly.
So nothing wrong. They're just indicators. So I want to hear, I heard you say that this approach kind of shortens the solution
Mm-hmm.
timeline from traditional talk therapy and how that is.
Mm-hmm.
But what comes up first is, why don't they call it human needs approach? Why is it called the human givens?
Well, yeah, I think they spend a lot of their time explaining that. It's funny. It's because it's a given that we have human needs.
Okay.
And there's another part to it, which are our innate resources. So most people are born with these 7 innate resources, unless there's, I think, autism and Asperger's, and maybe if there's developmental issues, but most of us have. So like an imagination, the ability to build rapport. I have these posted, and let me just grab them.
Yeah, and we can always
Can we post them somewhere?
yeah, we can post them at mindflipping.com, episode number 82, and the listeners can go there. And,
yeah. Well, so just using imagination, that's a great one, right? Because as you know, as a hypnotist, and we can use our imaginations to create a beautiful world or a very dark world. And if there has been trauma, or if there's just been a period of time where those thoughts continue and grow and grow and grow, then it creates it's difficult to lead the life you want to live.
Yeah.
To get over that. So
under an unwanted illusion.
Exactly. Yeah. So to me, that was, and probably not to you and some of like the experts you've had on, and maybe even a lot of your listeners, but for me, just hearing that about imagination was such an aha, because it's like, oh, I can talk to my clients about using that imagination for them, to work for them instead of to work against them, because that's what ruminating thoughts are. And so there's a whole piece in the modality about strengthening that observing self, that part of us that says, hey, wait a minute, you're being kind of hard on yourself. Can we give ourselves a break? And let's check in with ourselves. What needs aren't being met? Why do I feel that? Why am I acting this way based on, something that's not being met? So it's a very clear delineation for me about how to work with people, or work more effectively with people.
Awesome. So 7 innate resources.
Mm-hmm.
And 12 human givens,
10.
human needs. 10.
Well,
10.
there's 9. They combine them. So
okay.
The needs are basically community and having status and privacy, intimacy, being autonomous and having autonomy and control over your life. I mean, a lot of the piece about the human givens that I love too is most people do that. They nod their head when I'm talking.
Makes sense.
It totally makes sense. They get it. They've heard it before, because, they did combine a lot of the modalities that are already out there into one, which I love as a practitioner, because then I can just go take their courses and feel ready to go.
Yeah.
Because they have this great trauma technique that I know we'll talk about, but then also they have all these other tools to help people with anxiety and depression, and to look at the anxiety and depression outside of themselves, so that they're not saying, well, I am depressed. It's more, well, I feel depressed at these times. So what needs need to be met, or, yeah.
So before, and I do want to hear about that trauma technique. Before we clicked record, you kind of gave me a little bit more about how this came about. So it was a study of a number of fields, right? And kind of and it reminded me of how NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, was developed. They studied Milton Erickson and Virginia Satir, and I'm forgetting the third one, but took a little bit of each and created a model, created all these success areas into one.
Yeah. And you'll recognize, I know you do NLP, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
You'll recognize NLP in there. It's in there in a big way in the rewind technique. A lot of them, behavioral, CBT, solution focus, motivational, and that is what makes them unique. And I was saying it to my clinical supervisor a few years ago. I was saying, why isn't there just one thing that we can go learn that?
Right. Yeah.
So fortunately, I didn't have to invent it. It was already there all along.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So can you share a little bit more detail? My question was, how do we shorten the, knowing these approaches? How do we shorten? You mentioned a trauma technique. Is that how there's different techniques rather than just talking it out and looking at the past?
Oh yeah. It's very quick. in a lot of ways. Now, their research shows that their average lengths of sessions for a typical client is 4 to 6. So, you know, as a traditional talk therapist, that is mind blowing. That's mind flipping, right?
Right.
That's not what we do. So they teach you how to build rapport quickly, which is so important.
Of course.
So we're not talking about just going in and doing some magic trick. It's building rapport, gathering the information, and then deciding on what needs to be done. Now, they do 2 things that are different. They do the rewind technique, which I'll tell you about, and they do guided imagery, which I think a lot of hypnotists would understand, right? Rehearsing, which is a big deal, to rehearse what the change is in a very relaxed state. So I love that piece. And there's storytelling, which people love. I mean, I told a story, and I'll tell it later, but to an older guy, he's 84 and lost his wife of 60 years. And he was already a pretty anxious guy, okay, right? But this just amped it up, a lot of grief. And I told him this story, and I'll tell you, he repeats it. He calls me. He doesn't have to call me as much, you know, now, but he calls me every once in a while and says, "Oh, Sam, the guru's right. It'll pass." And it's so, he took that story and he owned it. And it was able to really help him understand that today might be terrible, but tomorrow will probably be better based on what we know. So yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So did I answer that question?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. So let's see. Well, you mentioned, you know, the rewind technique, guided imagery,
right,
storytelling. Those are all things that a lot of our hypnotherapist listeners incorporate all the time. So it's really cool that these are incorporated and included.
Yeah, they are. It's great.
Is there a favorite? So you mentioned trauma technique, you mentioned the story. Is there any particular mind flip strategy that you want to share now?
Sure. So you want me to tell a story about a client?
Absolutely.
Okay. So this is like a before and after picture.
I love it.
Okay. So when I first started working with this young woman, she had a lot of childhood stuff, right? Let's see, alcoholic mom, never wanted her. Lots of neglect, homelessness, living in a car for a while. And then as she got older, as an adult, as a young, late teen, she was raped. So by the time I saw her, she's about 30. So a ton of stuff, right? She's suicidal. She's over-aroused. She is unable to regulate herself. And really trying, you know, single mom, has, you know, nursing school. So, right. So I worked with her and for quite a while and did everything that I would normally do. I helped to ground her when she was over aroused. I got her in her body. I was doing good work, and she needed me to help her problem solve. So halfway through seeing her, I started working with the human givens and learning about them. So what I did is I set her up with a human givens therapist. I said, do the rewind technique. And she did it. And within a couple of days, she called me, and literally the tone of her voice had changed, which I imagine other people have seen. I know, right? I was like, whoa. And then she told me how she felt, like how good she felt, and how it felt like everything was in the past and she could move forward. And then, you know, she just didn't need me. So every once in a while I would hear from her. About 2 months after the first rewind, she called me and she was totally panicked. It wore off. It doesn't, you know, I knew this might happen. And I reminded her, it was like fine tuning. That's what I call it now. I just, what about this, or this? I just said a few things. Within 10 minutes, not only is she laughing, she's problem solving. And that's the huge piece. That's the difference I've seen, is that people can problem solve in a different way. And, you know, what we know about the brain is, right, the brain's over aroused. And then we're able to do these techniques that lower the arousal so that the neocortex can come in and do its thing and plan and dream and think ahead and
make decisions.
Yes, and make decisions and problem solve. And it was so beautiful to see. And I, you know, of course that just sold me on it because I saw it. And I was very, I've been it's humbling learning something new. I never thought I had the right way.
Of course.
But learning something that really makes a difference quickly made me feel much more equipped to be with people in a different way. So
awesome.
Yeah.
What a great feeling and a great story.
Yeah.
And so you said something, I don't remember the phrase you used, but is part of this approach, maybe it was being resourceful or problem solving, that you're giving them the tools to take care of themselves moving forward.
Right. And the tool is that their brain can relax and they can calm down.
Okay.
And the real belief with our innate resources that we have, which I can't unfortunately name all 7 right now.
Yeah, good. That's good. Yeah.
but that we have those tools with us. All of us do.
Yeah.
And so that real belief in a client or a person that, hey, you have what you need.
Yeah.
The tools I'm going to teach you is calming yourself down, and which is real self-soothing, right? It's deeper than self-care. It's really going to that place and saying, okay, I'm, because that was the one things that we talked about that time she called me was, okay, recognizing that you're getting over aroused. And she could. That's what's the difference was. She could actually she stopped herself, and then she'd call me and tell me, guess what happened? I got crazy. We used to call it losing her mind, because if a crisis came up, it just took her all the way back to freeze, like small child. And what am I going to do? There's nothing I can do. And I'm going to have to die,
Yep.
And so it was just, that was the piece, was that tool was just helping her to relax herself. And then, little adjustments. And that's the beauty of human givens as well, is they recognize that there might be some social skills that need to be taught. Because when we're over aroused a long period of time, anxious or even depressed, our minds aren't working in the way that they normally would. We're missing cues. We're not able to be with people. I mean, if you're anxious, if anyone out there's felt anxiety, I know I have, you're not present-minded.
Right.
You're really not. And so your ability to connect is totally impacted. And that's the thing I get most passionate about, because I think we could be teaching this stuff in kindergarten.
Yeah.
Like, hey, little one, when you start to feel this way, here's the things you can do.
Right.
And we are doing a better and better job, I think, with teaching this stuff. It's exciting.
So it sounds like a big core of this approach or process is helping your clients recognize that among the resources they have within them is the ability to tap in, check into that parasympathetic response that's there within all of us.
Right.
And these are things that you can do to get there, that your life is in that fight or flight, the freeze. I like to say that in so much of the work we do, it's about helping, it's that us being an illusion illuminator. We're under the misunderstanding on a subconscious level that there's a threat here.
Right.
And yet no, underneath it, there's this place of comfort, of relaxation, of mindfulness, of being present.
Yeah. And even being able to recognize there's a threat here is huge, right? Like, oh, wow, I'm going into this panic mode because my tire's flat. I wonder why, and then that ability to go back and kind of, if people want to, I think that's where the human givens, I mean, obviously 4 to 6 is an average. I think people with a lot of childhood trauma take a little longer, but I tell you, I've been talking to therapists all over the UK and Ireland. I get referrals from the home office. I say, tell me who's working with addicts, who's working with low income, who's working with the military. Talk to all of them. Nobody's working over a year. 10 sessions was like another, there's some people are, takes a little longer, and which makes sense. We're human.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's not like, I'm not saying, oh, it's a quick fix. You're going to go and, 4, 5, 6, you're done.
Right. Everybody's different.
Right.
We're all unique snowflakes.
Exactly.
So you mentioned the rewind technique a couple times. Can you give the outline for our listeners that maybe have heard the term, or maybe have even done it but forgotten it?
Sure.
Just kind of in general what it is.
Sure. So it's a deep relaxation that you do with the client. You have to activate the template. So if it's let's say it's an assault, you have to, they have to be able to tap into those feelings. And then it's a double disassociation. So after the relaxation, yeah, you're going to a lot of people are going to recognize this through NLP too. I think they've just tweaked it a little bit, but it's that double disassociation. And then after you do that, you bring them back into their body and their mind, and they rewind in their mind. They watch the incident backwards, and then they fast forward as if it's on a TV screen till when it was over, and back and forth till you see that they are less aroused. And that's basically it.
So cool.
And it is so cool. And I've seen it. And I tell you, I was so cautious about it because, that it just wasn't where I had never heard anything like it. Yeah. And so I really, talked to a lot of therapists about it to get some understanding, but I've seen it now with clients. And, and I've experienced it myself. So yeah, I think it's an interesting technique, and that's just one piece of it, right. The whole model, that's what I love about it too, is I feel like it really prepares a practitioner to work with clients, because there's breathing techniques they teach you, and, giving tasks when you have somebody who's really maybe ruminating, how to give them tasks, or, and they've come up with a sleep theory. I use that a lot with the depression cycle. And clients are always just nodding their head because they get it. As soon as I tell them about the cycle of depression, how it's affecting their sleep and motivation, yeah, that's what's happening. Like, yeah.
So that makes me think of, in your email to me, you said that, you've listened to a number of episodes, and including Maggie Minsk and Dr. Edith.
Yes, yes.
Chan, and she talks a lot about the importance of sleep and all the simple things.
Yeah.
Sleep and water and breathing,
right.
Right. we can go, days or weeks without food and survive. We can go maybe days without water, but we can't go very long without breath,
Right.
And the simple things like sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sleep is so important. I mean, I know the research is coming out more and more, and I think all practitioners will hone in on that quicker. But basically the dream theory that they've come up with is that throughout the day, our brains are problem solving, right? And when we go to sleep, our dream state, the REM sleep, is basically about working out what we didn't work out during the day. And research has shown us that depressed people dream more. So are they dreaming more? They're taking away from the rest and repair, which means they wake up tired.
Oh,
which leads to lack of motivation. I mean, it all makes sense when you say it. You're like, yeah, that's what I thought too. So it leads to lack of motivation. And I don't think I'm going to go for a swim today. And that's not a good idea, but that's what our bodies do. Right.
Yeah.
And then it kind of goes on and on, because in that day you're tired. So then maybe worries that you wouldn't have worried about are there now. Oh, I'm going to worry. I better worry about that. And so it kind of creates this cycle. Yeah. So really helping people step back and see that, like, this is why it's important that we, reduce the arousal during the day, if it's with a rewind or a guided imagery, or just giving people information. I've heard people say, oh, that really helped me just to understand that, what was going on in my mind matters. So, yeah.
You said something about the sleep, the processing. Oh, maybe I was just thinking, a couple of things have come together. I just had a client a couple of days ago for a kind of a speaking, interviewing phobia, and we did the rewind. And then I also said, I try to tell most of my clients, know that, experience and clients have told me, and research shows that the work that we're doing now is going to get processed and filtered tonight. So you may notice tomorrow things really kicking in. Mm-hmm. Do you see that as well? That clients will tell you that they'll leave, they feel different, but then, boy, it's like that night's sleep really
anchors it in a way.
Anchors,
yeah. And what I've been taught is sometimes it can take even longer. I mean, I think people when they've experienced a rewind, most people feel so much, they feel relaxed, but they feel different afterwards. That's what I've noticed. They do feel better.
Yeah.
And then I've noticed too, that over time, their ability to problem solve continues to strengthen.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think it probably has something to do with, you know, what's going on in the brain, but I don't know that part myself, but I do know that that's what I've seen is just over time, you become more and more aware of what you're thinking. So, you know, why am I thinking that? Like that observing self gets stronger and stronger. That ability to wait, I guess I don't have to sit here and worry about that right now, you know?
Yeah. It's as if resources are freed up.
Right. They are too, aren't they? I mean,
Yeah.
when you think about it, right, if you're not in that, you know, fight, flight, or freeze in your brain's that, you know, calm, you're able to plan, and you have more space and capacity, literally.
Yeah. I've been trained in hypnotherapy with dementia clients. And the theory,
Interesting.
and the theory is that the reason it works well to help them increase their activities of daily living, you know, the simple things, is because it frees up resources. They're less stressed, less anxious, which is going to happen when you can't remember what just happened. You know, the state of confusion that comes with dementia. And therapy seems to relaxes, calms, and frees up resources so that their short-term and long-term memory is better, and their ability to do simple things increases according to them and the people in their family. So it's
That's
similar.
incredible. Yeah, that is similar. That's great to know too. I work with a lot of older people, so I made myself a note to look into that.
Yeah, it's cool. Dr. Dan Nightingale out of the UK is the trainer that did a lot of the research, published 3 studies on it, and
wow,
powerful stuff. Yeah. Well, there it is. The speckle noise. It's time for the speckle round.
Okay.
Samantha, are you ready for the speckle round?
I am ready for the speckle round.
All right, excellent. So let's see. I'm going to spin the speckle round wheel. What question comes up first? Oh, this one hasn't come up in a while. I don't even know if, yes, listeners, my guests do get some of the speckle round questions ahead of time, but I'm not sure if this was on there. What's been the most difficult part of your life?
Oh, well, that's a good one. Well, I think trying to find what has really helped me to calm myself down. So, and I say it's difficult because it's taken a lot of time, which is another reason why I'm passionate about what I do and about getting it to as many people. Because, so my mom died when I was 12. And then I come from a family of 8 siblings, and we were separated.
Wow.
I was actually placed in a family friend's home for a year. So I lived with strangers for a year. And then we were fully separated. And then lots of stuff happened. My dad did his best to try to raise us, but I was kind of on my own. So a lot of just chaos. And I was always seeking out how to get help. And I found really early on that if I went to the doctors and said, I feel this way, that they wanted to put me on medication or, basically make me feel like something was wrong. There was nothing wrong. Now I understand. I mean, there was a lot of trauma. I mean, losing a parent at a young age is traumatic, but it was also the separation and moving to another, leaving family, living in another state. I was mugged by gunpoint at a very young age.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I could go on. It's like, the older I get, the more I'm like, wow, I was so resilient.
Yeah.
Because I really just pushed through, and I did the best I could, made tons of mistakes, did my best, trying to help my younger siblings and all that. Had to go through a lot of stuff around that, feeling guilty, didn't do enough. So, and I kept looking. I mean, I'm a seeker. I went to Chinese doctors and I went to hypnotists, but it was interesting. I did find something really interesting out about myself, but didn't I only saw them one time. So I wish now in hindsight,
Sure.
but you know, acupuncture all over, everywhere I go, I find somebody, some kind of healer to connect with. And I've always been in the presence of it. And I've been amazed too, you know, whatever country I'm in, I find somebody they're right there. Actually, this, acupuncturist in Mexico City, he told me, I lived in Mexico for a while, and he said to me, he goes, his theory was, a long time ago, we were all of us like-minded people were in a tribe, and we cared for each other, and we were, you know, we really lifted each other up. And then we decided we needed to spread out and go and spread this message. And then every once in a while in our lives, we come back together and we meet each other.
Huh.
That was such a beautiful story, because
Yeah.
that's how we felt. Like we just connected, and he was working on me. You know, I had back or neck issues or whatever. So the difficult part, going back to that, was finding what I needed. So life happens. Like my story is my story. Everyone has a story. And, you know, they're all different versions of tough things that happen. That's life. And then I'm not saying like, oh, that's life, your mom dies or whatever, but I'm saying these things happen to us. And so I want to spread the word of what works so that people don't have to it took me 15, 20 years to really move through a lot of this. It doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
And I was a seeker. So then I really feel for people who don't have that curiosity, and they're just like, they don't know what to do. So they live a life where they're not meeting their potential. They're not even that. They're not able to relax and let go and just enjoy their lives, enjoy their family and friends and stuff. So
Have an enjoyable moment.
yes, absolutely. Yeah. When I started having enjoyable moments, it was intoxicating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's that's a good question.
Thank you so much for sharing that, for
Oh
being
yeah.
open and vulnerable and sharing that. Because I'm sure, I know I can relate. I know our listeners on some level can relate. One of my favorite quotes from one of my role models, Mr. Rogers, our regular listeners will know that he's up there. And I think he's quoting somebody else. It might be from The Little Prince, the movie and book The Little Prince. That which is most personal to us is most universal.
Ah, that's really good. I like that.
Yeah. And it's so true. You know, we think this, you know, my story, the fact that I lost my parent young, I was mugged, I was raped, I was abandoned.
Right.
Nobody gets, yet everybody gets.
Everybody does in one form or the other. And that touches on something else I'm passionate about, is telling the story. Because, you know, I've noticed over the years, I'd listen to people talk about their childhoods, their sturdy, wonderful childhoods. And I would feel, a lot of times I'd feel happy for them, but I'd also feel a sense of envy. Like, wow, you got to go on vacations and do all that. It's like, wow. And so then I started thinking, you know, both have a place. I want to hear that possibility that's out there, but also I want to be able to share my story and not feel like I'm apologizing.
Yeah.
You know, because when you're younger too, when you say because my dad died when I was 22. So when you say your parents died, some people just shut down. Just like they couldn't.
What? Hold it.
Yeah. So I started to, I would just not tell it. My sister and I traveled together once, and it was funny. We both did it. We didn't mention it, you know, and it was like an opening for it to happen. And both of us were like, no, yeah.
Not going there.
Yeah. That was a long time ago, but yeah.
Huh.
So.
Yeah. Interesting. So yeah, you said a couple of other things in sharing there that resonated with me. And that's it. So I lost, listeners may remember, I think I've shared on here, I lost my dad when I was 13. He was 41.
Oh, wow. It's almost the same. I was 12.
Very close.
I'm almost 41 too.
And, you know, gratefully, my mom, just from my perspective, and I have 3 sisters. Those are my only siblings. We all processed it in our own way. You know, from my perspective, it was handled wonderfully. And so after that, re-traumatized in ways that your story was, or
Right.
other people. And that it was, of course, there was trauma involved, but it was like so many of our most difficult times, there were great lessons, understandings about myself and who I am.
Right.
And so what I am passionate about and sharing through the podcast and the work I do is what I gratefully have been able to see is that it's there for all of us, whether we've been through a ton of trauma or big T trauma or little T trauma. We have within us the ability to find our own peace, those peaceful moments, as we talked about.
Yeah.
Everybody has, and we hear the stories and we see the stories, people that are born without arms and legs that find peaceful moments, and people that have been burned. And, Randy Konikoff, one of the guests on the podcast, had some trauma, big T trauma in her life, and has peace in her life now. And so,
nice. Yeah, it's good.
It is wonderful. Thank you. All right, another speckle round question as I spin this speckle round wheel.
Let's hear it.
Let's see. Is there something that you don't believe now that you thought you always would?
Yeah.
Something you don't believe that you thought you always would. And I'm not talking about Santa or anything like that.
Santa. Yeah, I think it's that we don't need mountains of therapy to feel better. Like that belief as a traditional talk therapist was, it takes the time it takes, which is true. It's still a true statement.
On some level, yeah.
Yeah. And there are ways that we can help people move on and not stay in that story too longer than they need to. The rewind doesn't change your past. It's still a memory. They're bad memories, but they're not over aroused memories. They're not taking you down with that fight, flight, or freeze. So yeah, that's the biggest thing I've kind of unlearned.
I love it. Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Takes the negative power, if you will, or the power out of it. You can still remember it. It's still there, but
yeah. And it's part of like my story is part of my story. And so I'm so glad I can tell it now in a way where, that I can really be seen and not feel like whatever I was doing before, didn't have a right to or whatever. So, yeah.
I love
and also that, oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead. Also,
I was just going to say, I think that unlearning that I did gives people the individual power. And I like that because that makes sense that I can help myself,
Yeah. And I was going to say, I love how you said that can be seen. It's like when you, before you processed it, as you talk about it, you're not your true self.
Right.
And then when you can talk about it from a place of authenticity, this is who I am. That was just an event. That's not who I am.
Mm-hmm.
You are being seen for who you choose to really be. And then that is an example, a model for everybody. Right. Wow. Look how she is her, like you said, you could hear the shift in that client's voice when she called, and people can sense beyond the words, there's something about you that's different as you share that story now. And it gives somebody who's been through something similar hope that I can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that our stories can be told. It's, it's just, our stories are important. They matter. Yeah. It's good.
Excellent. All right. Another background question. Samantha, do you have a word or phrase of the day that you would like to share?
Yes. I actually wrote a note about it.
Cool.
A word or phrase. Where is it? Oh, yeah. So just take the time to understand your brain. That's the big one for me. Like really getting some understanding about what happens when. So Dan Siegel's, I'm sure a lot of people have seen that, his hand model where the thumb is No. I use this a lot. And so the thumb, I know our listeners on the podcast can't see it, but if your thumb is across your palm, and you can also Google Dan Siegel hand model. But
so kind of like holding your hand up like you're going to wave to somebody or give a high five, and then you turn your thumb towards your palm.
Exactly. Yep. And that thumb is your amygdala. And the four fingers up top, that's your neocortex. So when your neocortex is down and calm, right? So if you put your fingers over your thumb and make a fist, your thinking cap is on. So you can look at the world and make good decisions and think and plan and dream. But if your thinking cap flies off because of trauma, then your amygdala is exposed and you're in that fight, flight, or freeze. And one thing I did learn recently, and this is probably a very watered down medical way of looking at it, so anyone out there wants to correct me, please feel free, but that the amygdala actually sends a signal to the neocortex like, hey, don't come down. I don't want to think and plan because I have to survive whatever's happening. And so when our brains are developing, that was a tiger attack or whatever.
Right.
You know, whatever, on the savannah. And our brains were saying, run, don't do anything else but run. And so and I tell folks, I was like, we need our amygdalas. It's important. It keeps us alive. It's the thing that tells you when to cross the street, you know, if something's coming at you. But unfortunately, it's not smart enough to distinguish what is the past. So so the term they use in Human Givens is pattern matching, that our brain is basically a prediction machine. It sees something on the horizon, its pattern matches it to something in the past. So if your thinking brain flies off, you're back in the past and you're over aroused. And so just understanding that. I mean, literally my clients, when I tell them this, they start doing this in front of me. They're like, oh yeah, when I was this way, I could really, you know, think about it.
Yeah, when the fingers are down.
Yeah, when the fingers are down, when the thinking cap is on. And I think that happens a lot with people in trauma. And there's that cycle, right? So especially those of us like in adulthood, I've seen this a ton with adults who they're high functioning, they're managing, they're living their lives, they've got careers. Nobody looks at them and says, oh, there's something wrong, but they go through that arousal where they get over aroused and a problem really shuts them down and it's overwhelming. I don't know what I'm going to do. And until they can calm themselves down, then they realize, okay, I know what I can do. I can do this, this, and this. But that collapse happens in that moment where it feels overwhelming. And there's something about that cycle, disrupting that cycle with the observing self and this trauma piece that really helps people and me, everybody.
Yeah.
I'm working with, yeah.
So you said a couple of things that I wanted to touch on. First of all, the amygdala is important. You know, it's important, yet in many ways it's not as important evolutionary as it used to be. You know, I'll tell my clients, it's almost like, you know, it's looking. I've heard, you know, 5 times per second. You know, our brain is scanning our environment for threats, and if we look for something, we can find it. You know, and so our
5 times.
5 times per second. Yeah, looking for, scanning our environment, looking for a threat, a sound, an image, something, and we can get in the habit of finding a threat, you know, and the pattern matching is kind of, I hadn't heard that term. I like to say with my clients that something happens and then our subconscious kind of overgeneralizes it. Oh, it's
pattern.
like, yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. It's just a different word. Yeah. And it actually, that's what the brain's there to do. It's to predict. So like if something happens, it's like, when was the last time? It goes back into I think it's the hippocampus. Like, when did this happen before? Oh yeah, that scary time that guy attacked us. You better run. And it's like your neighbor.
Yeah.
But your brain isn't distinguishing. So being present and being in our bodies is so important, because if not, our amygdala can just, you know,
be overactive, wreak havoc, run our lives.
Yeah, and make us look like, you know, there's something wrong. I mean, I think people do see it. You see it in people when they're over aroused, like, whoa, they overreacted there.
Yeah.
Well, if their pattern matched it, you know, if their brain put it, you know, that reminded me when my dad came in my room and da-da-da-da-da. We just don't know where people are sometimes. We really don't. Oh.
Wild stuff. All right, let's see. We got time for one last back around question. And you get to pick it. So
okay.
I gave you some before. Was there a favorite there, something that you'd like to spark around question? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the one about a giveaway for the listeners.
Yeah.
It's just a short story. It's the story I referred to earlier in the podcast.
Yes.
But I think it's a good one. Okay, good. So a young trainee is studying under the Buddha master. And she approaches the master and says, Master, I try and I try, I cannot calm my mind. And the master puts his hand on her shoulder and says, don't worry, it will pass. So the next week she comes back and she says to the master, I'm in nirvana. I've done it. I've reached this place. I'm in total bliss. And he puts his hands on her shoulder and says, this will pass. And I use that story a lot because it's so true. It's true of that cycle of with trauma. It's true with depression. It's true with anxiety. It's true with so many things that when we're feeling all these feelings and we're overwhelmed, if we calm ourselves down, it surely will pass. So, yeah.
I love it. Great story.
Good. Thank you. Yeah. I use that one a lot with clients.
Is that the one that the 80-some-year-old is?
Yeah, he's 84 and he calls me up. He's like, hey, Sam, the guru was right yesterday. I was really having a rough day, but today I feel better. And I'm like, good job. Because he's recognizing it. It gave him a way in to recognize what was happening to himself and not, he was having panic attacks.
Okay.
Really, really major. I'm in I'm calling you from the emergency room, panic attacks.
Oh.
And so this really helps him to calm himself down and realize, the sad feelings or feelings of loss. I mean, as we get older too, there's a lot going on there about, our lives. And so he just called me yesterday and said it. And he's writing his memoir now. So,
nice.
His capacity to relax is changing because he's like, yeah, I think I'm going to write a memoir for my kids. I'm like, love it. Do it.
Yeah. Wow. So again, created resources, created space for him to get creative. And wow, I love it.
Yeah. And use his imagination to help him with feelings of loneliness or whatever, rather than feeling scared and panicked and I'm alone and my wife's gone and I'm never going to be the same, all that he was doing.
Right.
Yeah.
That story reminds me of one of probably my top 5 quotes that I hold close to me, and I'll share it with kids at times. And I think it's a Buddhist quote, and it's all that arises passes away.
Same. Yeah.
Same thing. And it's
beautiful. Yeah.
Awesome.
That's a good one. Yeah.
It is. Well, thank you so much, Samantha.
Thank you, Rick. I enjoyed this very much.
Yeah. And so that was a great giveaway, a great story. Is there any other last request that you have for our listeners, or simply if you want to share a way for them to contact you?
Yeah, so my website is www.everybodyok.com, and you can contact me through there. And I have information about the Human Givens, and I have information about the training we're holding this summer. Excellent. So we can only hold about 30 people, so I think it's going to fill up really quick, but please reach out. I'll let you know when they're coming next, or answer any questions, or just start a conversation. So. And
it's in LA.
Yeah, the train's going to be in LA. Eventually, it's July 26th to the 30th. It's 5 days. We're going to do 4 different courses, the rewind technique being one of them. That's a 2-day course. We're going to do guided imagery. Yeah. So
fantastic.
It should be a rich experience. I love the training. So I'm looking forward to seeing all of the trainers and being in the classes again.
Yeah. And you can drive to it.
And I can drive to it. Yeah. Yeah. And not suffer through jet lag. I had so much jet lag when I was flying over there, but I'm not complaining. It was a great experience. Yeah.
It was worth it. All right. Everybodyok.com.
Everybodyok.com.
Excellent. Thank you, Samantha. I love you and I appreciate you.
Thank you, Rick. I love you too. And I really appreciate what you're doing. And I appreciate you having me on here.
My pleasure.